Now, I normally don't talk about knives as soon as I get them because the performance of knives to me is a big part of why they buy. The other is just because I want to support particular makers or manufacturers because of the nature of who they are. And you can't really know much about performance as soon as you get a knife, although you can infer some things about characteristics similar to other knives you've used or dissimilar characteristics. But as I opened a package from cKc Knives, Kyley Harris, it struck me at the extreme diversity in some of the knives that he makes, which were exemplified by some of the knives in the actual package. And I just want to highlight a few of the knives that I have from him. I have others. This is a prototype where Kyley was working on a number of issues, and the interesting thing about it is at the time there was quite some discussion on the forums about LMAX, and a number of people were making some rather strong negative statements about it. And I made the argument in a couple of areas that what could be seen could just be the effect of power grinding overheating the blades. That's not inherently a characteristic of LMAX itself or how it was being hardened. And Kyley took this blade and intentionally overheated it to provide a baseline or reference point that I could use against other LMAX blades which weren't damaged and just other non-damaged blades, which is kind of interesting. But I found, even after toying with this, because of the nature of the handle, which is quite functional in a number of grips, even though the blade is not actually locking, because again, it's not a knife as much as it's a prototype where he was looking at a bunch of features, I found that I was using it, though having to take care to make sure that the blade didn't actually close in use, and it was kind of an interesting design. I also have this, which is another blade. This is LMAX, but it's not actually intentionally overheated. And it's this blade and this handle were not meant to go together. That's why the choil is so large on this one. Prototype in a number of respects, but very nice folding knife. Although the handle is probably a bit too thick for some, it wouldn't make very nice flat sort of pocket carry, but still a very nice knife. I also have an actual fully finished folding knife. This is a slip joint. Very nice piece. Kyley was doing a video where he was talking about a new knife that he was making, a friction folder, and about how light it was and how thin and that kind of stuff. And I was wondering, could you take that to an extreme and what would it actually look like? So I discussed it with him, and this is what resulted. You mightn't fully be able to appreciate this until you hold it. He has a video on it. It's extremely light. It's very thin in both the blade and the handle scales, which are not skeletonized or supported by metals of any type, titanium or steel. It's made just to be an ultralight precision cutting tool. Very nice clip. And I look forward to using this blade. This is one of the ones that struck me on the sort of extreme end of that sort of performance design scope of work spectrum. Friction folder. This is part of the Towards 0.1 micron library or mule project. Lightweight, very thin blade stock, very high grind, very efficient cutter. This is the basic design that's going to be used. Now you might say, well Cliff, that's not very much of a departure of design from that friction folder you just had. No, it's not. Just wanted to put this up there to show how he's supporting the library or mule project. This beastly knife is on the other end of the spectrum. Okay, the same guy that made this made this. Now just think about having both these ideas rattling around in your brain. It's kind of an interesting contrast that both of these came from the same person, and I just thought it was a bit amusing. Now, this is a knife made from the steel, which Kyley hasn't made publicly available yet what it actually is. He's doing some interesting work with it. And again, that's thinking outside the normal spectrum of what steel should be used and what are good steels. And he's just poking around and having some fun and trying some materials which people might actually think might not actually make good steels for knives, but it's kind of interesting. Now, Is this a functional knife design? It's definitely a fun knife design. Is it optimal? Well, everything is optimal for something. I'm not exactly sure what this would be yet. But it's going to be a very interesting and fun knife to actually play with. The interesting thing is, see the way I'm holding it right now, it's actually neutrally balanced right here for your precision type cutting. How much precision you're going to do with this mammoth blade, okay. But it's actually designed really well and has some number of well thought out features. Like, see the way this hump goes right here? It sits naturally in your hand right there, so it actually works relatively well for pinch type grips. Again, even though it's neutrally balanced, it's quite heavy. So it's not like, hey, I'm going to be dicing up some green onions, I better reach for the frigging monster zombie head smasher blade. But it's kind of interesting. So the first thing you may think on is, well, that's kind of silly. Why did you design this great big massive blade and make it neutrally balanced? So therefore it has very limited chopping ability because you can't get much rotational inertia. Well, that's why you put an extended handle on it. So again, if you're doing precision cutting, you want to neutralize the balance, you grip up around the blade, or you grip right up around the handle as close as you can. But as you can see, I'm nowhere near the end of the handle. So if I shift back, and you can see the handle flares out tremendously to give you that security. And it also tapers in this direction as well, and the handle is left with a very rough texture, which is how I like, and fully enclosed, so the tang is hidden inside. So strictly not a full tang by many definitions. People get way too focused on that. You shift back here, and now all of a sudden you're inches behind the balance point, so you have a lot of rotational power on the chop. Again, is this an optimal design? Not arguing it, but it's going to be a fun design and an interesting design to use. It's certainly not going to stick or wedge very much in woods because of the massive spine. Great knife to split wood with, obviously. And if you were trying to throw it and you hit someone, it really wouldn't matter if the edge or a point hit him because you essentially got a decently weighted club. So relatively fun design, but the main point of this video is that I found it quite interesting to look at not only the differences in the steels but also the characteristics of the knives and how there was such a wide difference or in the scope of work, but still some of the characteristics are very, very similar. For example, you can see this is almost a full zero ground blade, so the edge, okay, believe it or not, is quite thin. So on shallow cutting, this is actually going to cut better than your standard Moras because the edge is so much thinner. Of course, it's much heavier, it's going to be more awkward to use, but it still has that very high level of fine cutting ability. The handle and blade are well thought out, so again, you have that extended handle to bring out the power chopping ability when you want it, but you have the ability to go up forward on the blade in a number of well-designed grips to neutralize it, to give you some kind of fine cutting ability. Again, not arguing that this is going to compete with a decent kitchen knife for doing delicate work, but it will be fun to use, will be entertaining to use, and just carry. But again, the main point of the video was just to show a few examples of knives, and again, these were the two that really struck me as just being such an interesting duo of blades to carry made by the same person, because they are both extreme in and of their nature but on the complete opposite ends of the spectrum, but they both show the same aspects of design of a maker who is pushing the boundaries of knives and not simply looking at what's popular, what do other people use, but trying new materials such as this steel, trying different ways of construction such as the ultralight and slim nature of this knife, and coming up with some interesting ideas and functions when it comes to knives.